wondering how to explain to Leonora the magic that could exist between two people. Not that Louisa herself had ever felt it. Since her own debut 2 years ago, she had frequented balls and picnics, concerts and plays, hoping to find the one man who would melt her heart. All she had found had been disappointed hopes. At least, so far. Still, Louisa understood well the smile she often saw on their parents' faces when they caught each other's eye across a crowded room. After over 30 years of marriage and 6 children born to them, Lord and Lady Whickerton were still as smitten with each other as on the day they had first met. At least, according to Grandma Edie. Of course, Louisa and her siblings had not been born at the time, so could not speak from experience. But they all believed Grandma Edie. The woman had never been known to be wrong. Ever. Younger than Louisa by no more than a year, Leonora, however, had never been able to grasp the effect love could have upon one's life. She had a very rational way of looking at the world, even when it came to emotions. She was not cold or unfeeling, not at all. She possessed a truly watchful eye, not unlike Grandma Edie's, and knew how to spot the first sparks of love or the pangs of heartbreak. Still, for Leo it was hard to calculate with something as unreliable as emotions. Yet she was fascinated by them, perhaps even more so because they could not be added up like 2 and 2. Louisa, though, was the opposite in every way. Like fire and water, day and night, the two sisters could not be more different. Where Leonora was rational and calculated, Louisa was passionate and spontaneous. She followed her heart, loved to feel the sun upon her skin and the sensation of twirling in the open air until her head spun. Balls meant delightful company, dancing until dawn, and people she cared for sharing in her joy. They also allowed her to mingle with eligible gentlemen, whispering of a match not unlike her parents. That had been Louisa's dream ever since she could remember. A man who would set her world on fire with a single look. A man who... "Lord Barrington is looking at you," Leonora remarked, with no more than a slight suggestion in her voice. Indeed, for her, it was merely an observation. Nothing more and nothing less. Or was it? Louisa had to admit that sometimes she was not certain what hid behind Leonora's dark blue eyes. At her sister's words, Louisa stilled, then carefully glanced in the direction Leonora indicated. Of course, Louisa had taken note of him the second they had stepped into the ballroom. Of course she had. She always did. Tall, with raven black hair and devilishly dark eyes, Phineas Hawke, Viscount Barrington, was an imposing man. Often, one could find a bit of wicked grin upon his face and hear a daringly teasing remark fall from his lips. Elder brother to Mr. Tobias Hawke, Anne's childhood friend, Louisa had known him for years. However, they had never spent much time in each other's company. Lately, though, she had felt his gaze linger upon her, as it did now. Louisa inhaled a slow breath as his dark gaze swept over her face before seeking hers with bold curiosity. Something in her stomach began to flutter, excitedly, teasingly, deliciously. "Do you welcome his interest?" Leonora asked curiously beside her, as she brushed a dark curl behind her ear as though it was obstructing her view, hindering an accurate observation. Louisa sighed, then forced her gaze from Lord Barrington's. "What interest?" she asked, displeased with her sister's watchful attention. "He's merely looking in our direction." Leonora's gaze narrowed before she turned to observe the man in question more thoroughly. Louisa wanted to sink into a hole in the ground. "Do not stare at him," she hissed at her sister, urging her over to the